afternoon, brethren. I want to welcome and thank everyone for tuning in and joining us from the various locations from around the world for the broadcast of today's Sabbath message. Today's message will be delivered by David J. Smith, and it is titled Prophecy. Did you know? This is part B. This is the final installment of this series. This is message number 1126B. And David J. first delivered this message on March 19th, 2009. And I'm your host today, Tim West. Now, David's message is about 2 hours long, so I'll keep my talk short. I have posted the possible feast day dates for this year's fall feast days on the website, as well as the screen behind me here. Now, for those of you who are listening in on the telephone conference call, I'll be going over those dates right after the message today, so have a pen and paper ready so you can jot them down. Let's get right into David's message. Grab something to sip on, some lunch or your favorite snack, find a comfortable place to relax, and enjoy today's message.
Did you know that 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy? That prophecy began in the garden when God prophesied of a need of a Savior in Genesis chapter 3, who would come into the world and reconcile the world back to the Father. That the Bible ends with prophecy in Revelation chapter 21 and 22, with New Jerusalem coming down out of the heavens with God the Father, and then Jesus will live within it. This is after the salvation process has been finished. And in Revelation 19:10 it says that the testimony of Jesus Christ is the spirit of prophecy. Did you know that before the completion of all prophecy, a world government will rise? It's found in Revelation chapter 13, the entirety of the chapter, and then interspersed in other prophecies throughout the Bible. This same system that bears rule over the whole world, along with an economic system called the Mark of the Beast, will fight Jesus Christ at his return, according to Revelation chapter 17, verse 12 to 14. The saints will be with Jesus Christ to assume the governmental post under the authority of Christ when he returns and smashes the beast system that's found in Revelation chapter 5, verse 9 and verse 10. Did you know that concrete evidence exists to prove that this world government system is rising right now before our very eyes, before the eyes of those who have a spirit of discernment to understand? Let's investigate just a little bit. Did you know that former President Richard Nixon made a visit to Communist China? He also was a former member of the subversive Marxist Council on Foreign Relations. He mentioned to the Chinese leadership when he was there, quote, "the hope that each of us," that's China and the United States, "has to build a new world order," end of quote. On May 18th, 1972, Roy M. Ashe, who happened to be the director of the Office of Management and Budget for Richard Nixon, declared, and I quote, that within 2 decades, the institutional framework for a world economy or economic community will be in place, and aspects of individual sovereignty will be given over to a supranational authority, end of quote. That means world government. That means you and I would no longer have individual freedom, but we would come under the authority of a world superstate. Did you know that in 1973, international banker and staunch member of the subversive Marxist Council on Foreign Relations, David Rockefeller, founded a new organization called the Trilateral Commission. He invited former President Jimmy Carter to become one of the founding members of this organization. It was founded upon Zygmunt Brzezinski's book, Between Two Ages, where he lavishly, in the pages of that book, praises international communism, and he denounced America's constitutional republic as being obsolete. Of course, those who have kept up and watched Jimmy Carter trot around the world working for world government right now can understand his affiliation with the Trilateral Commission. Did you know that the Humanist Manifesto number 2 was published in 1973? It stated, and I quote, "The dawn of a new age, a secular society on a planetary scale. We begin with humans, not God. Nature, not deity. A system of world law and a world order based upon transnational federal government. The true revolution is occurring," end of quote. Yes, world government is marching on. Bible prophecy is happening before our very eyes, and yet the Christian community at large, the world over, is taking a nap. They're taking a siesta. Did you know that the National Education Association, abbreviated the NEA, former President Catherine Burns wrote in the Saturday Review of Education on February 10th, 1973, that dramatic changes had to take place in education, and especially in the teachers. She stated in the pages of that article that the teacher will be a conveyor of values, a philosopher. We will be change agents, end of quote. And she was referring to changing the young people away from God, country, and Christianity to atheism, world government, and the worship of Lucifer when they came into their kingdom. A man by the name of Ronald Havelock published a book called The Change Agent's Guide to Innovation in Education. And then this book, it was created in conjunction with the federal government. They had a contract with the federal government of the United States. That contract number was 0EC-08-080603-4535, parentheses 010, end of parentheses. It states, and I quote, "It must be admitted that sometimes collaboration will not work. And when it fails, there are a number of alternatives that should be considered, ranging to complete deception." End of quote. Who is the deceiver of the world according to Revelation 12, verse 9? None other than Satan, called the devil, that old dragon that was cast out into the earth to deceive the whole world. And so we have people on a federal level in Washington, D.C., giving contracts where they state that if you cannot complete your transformation of the young students and the normal procedures, then you must use complete deception to distort their worldview and turn them into a new world order person. Did you know that the Harvard Educational Review was published and Hillary Clinton happened to be one of the writers inside of the Harvard Educational Review? She gave her radical socialist views of children's rights in the article entitled "Children Under the Law." In this particular article, she said that children must become independent of their parents. The state must take control of the lives of the children. Children must be weaned from Christianity and gotten off their Christian political viewpoint in order to fit them into a new world order. Hillary Rodham Clinton, her name is being bandied about running on the Democratic Party's nomination for the presidency for the year 2008. And she wants your children for the state. Not only that, but Hillary Clinton sat on the board of directors of the Children's Defense Fund, which Don Federer in his syndicated column called a liberal organization fighting for a welfare state. The head of the Children's Defense Fund was Subversive Council on Foreign Relations member Marian Wright Edelman. And this is who Hillary Clinton has butted up with in her fight for the children for the state. Did you know that when international banker David Rockefeller founded the Trilateral Commission, he also invited George Herbert Walker Bush from Texas to become a board member? He was also a board member of the Subversive Council on Foreign Relations. When he resigned, both organizations, the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations in 1979, the only reason was to run for the vice presidency with Ronald Reagan in 1980, and they became president and vice president. So George Herbert Walker Bush, a member of both subversive organizations, was a vice president for 8 years and then became president for 4 years. He is the one that spoke 210 times and called for the New World Order, and he called it just like that with those names. 210 times. Did you know that on December 10th, 1973, National Security Council Memorandum number 200 entitled Implications of Worldwide Population Growth for U.S. Security and Overseas Interest was classified as being confidential. No one was to be able to see it, but it was declassified 15 years later and became public. This document revealed the action that the United States government had taken and has continued to take until this very moment in time concerning the population control of the world. I will quote a statement from it. If future numbers are to be kept within reasonable bounds, it is urgent that measures to reduce fertility be started and made effective in the 1970s and the 1980s. No country has reduced its population growth without resorting to abortion. End of quote. Now do we understand why there had to be a court case in America that made abortion legal, even though it is immoral in God's eyes, and it is taking of innocent blood, which is an abomination to God Almighty. Did you know that at the World Conference of Religion for Peace that was held in Belgium in 1974, a man by the name of Douglas Roche called for a new world order among all the religious groups. In a report entitled New International Economic Order, the United Nations General Assembly outlined a plan to redistribute the wealth of the world, which is pure Marxism, socialism, communism, from the rich nations to the poor nations. Way back in 1974, the plan was laid out through the United Nations. The United Nations is no friend of America, but it is fulfilling Bible prophecy. Did you know that in 1975, the term New World Order that was once used by Adam Weishaupt when he founded that ultra-secret Illuminati on May 1st, 1776, that it began to be called for openly? A Novus Ordo Seclorum is right on the back of the $1 bill of every single American. And then the word Novus Ordo Seclorum means the new secular world order. In other words, without God, without Jesus Christ. And it's been on the back of the Federal Reserve $1 bill ever since the 1930s, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt saw to it that it was placed there. And then at the top of the pyramid is the all-seeing eye of Lucifer. And when you read the occult literature, the most prominent of all symbols is the all-seeing eye of Lucifer, which he will guide the world into an illuminated society. Did you know that the Center for International Studies at Princeton University published a study called A New World Order in 1975? Princeton University, Ivy League, prestigious, that trains and educates the elite of the United States that go into government. Did you know that the New York Times editor James Reston wrote that President Gerald Ford and Brezhnev, dictator of the former Soviet Union, should, and I quote his words, forget the past and work together for a new world order? End of quote. 32 senators and 92 representatives in the Congress of the United States signed a Declaration of Interdependence in 1975, which stated that we must, quote, bring forth a new world order, end of quote, fulfilling Revelation chapter 13 before the return of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ will smash that system of world government, because it'll be the worship of Lucifer, Satan the devil, and the name of Jesus Christ and God the Father will not be allowed to be spoken anywhere in the world openly. Congresswoman Marjorie Holt refused to sign that document. She gave her reason, quote, it calls for the surrender of our national sovereignty to international organizations. It declares that our economy should be regulated by international authorities. It proposes that we enter a new world order that would redistribute the wealth created by the American people. End of quote. The goal of international communism and socialism is to make everybody in the world equal. That is, except the ones who are in charge. They will own everything, and the rest of us will be their slaves and their slave state. Once again, many of our congressmen and congresswomen have committed, I will use the word treason, because one famous historian said, the reason treason prospers is that none dare call it treason. But it is treason when you take an oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States, to protect our Bill of Rights, and then you sign documents to destroy them and turn us over to a one-world government under the United Nations organization. Did you know that the Rockefeller Foundation's annual report for 1975 said, and I quote, we are one world, and there will be one future, for better or for worse, for all of us. Central to the new ethic is controlled economic growth. It is also necessary to control fertility. End of quote. Therefore, once again, the right to abortion. That's why the propaganda campaign came on the scene, that a woman has control of her own body. She has a right to say whether she will have an abortion or not. That's why you cannot call it murder in America and the shedding of innocent blood, because they must reduce the population of the world. They said because the natural resources will run out. And since we, the peons of society, cannot determine how to control our offspring, they must control them for us through abortion. Did you know that in 1975, retired Navy Admiral and former Council on Foreign Relations member who left that organization, Chester Ward, co-authored a book with Phyllis Schlafly of Eagle Forum. It was entitled Kissinger on the Couch. It was a book about Henry Kissinger and what he did to destroy the United States of America and our foreign policy during his tenure as Secretary of State. He revealed, that is, Chester Ward, the goal of the Council on Foreign Relations as being, quote, the submergence of United States sovereignty and national independence into an all-powerful one world government, and to confound and discredit intellectually and politically anyone who opposes it, end of quote. Do you not think there is a conspiracy for world government? Satan was the first great conspirator. He's working behind the scenes, invisibly empowering human beings who worship him. Revelation 13:2 says so. That's why world government is coming. People don't like to hear the word conspiracy, but that's exactly what it is. Did you know that in the January-February 1976 issue of The Humanist, Professor Sheila Swartz wrote an article where she expressed her thankfulness that, quote, the crazies, meaning fundamentalist Christians, constitutionalists, and patriots of America, don't do all that much reading. If they did, they would find they have already been defeated. End of quote. You know, she was right. While Americans sat back and watched television, did exactly what the Illuminati said, they would promote all types of entertainment and sports to get our mind off government. Then they would create a world government, would wake up with socialism in America, not even know how it happened. And that is exactly what has happened over a period of 30 to 50 years in America. Did you know that in February 1976, John Martin Rice of the University of Texas wrote in a journal an article called Theory into Practice? He said, quote, formal education has a contributory role to play in providing needed information and promoting changed attitudes toward a new world order. Democracy in education then would mean teaching of those values, attitudes, and abilities most likely to contribute to the development of such a world order. He went on down in the article and said that they must develop an international world order under law. End of quote. This was exactly the phraseology of former President George Herbert Walker Bush. He started saying it in 1990 when they started the first Iraqi war. And he said, this is our big chance for the new world order. Did you know that in the March-April 1976 issue of the Humanist Magazine, a man by the name of Paul Blanchard wrote, I quote, I think the most important factor leading us to a secular society, remember that's without God, has been the educational factor. Our schools may not teach Johnny to read properly, but the fact that Johnny is in school, until he is 16 tends to lead toward the elimination of religious superstition. Is there a conspiracy? Yes, there is, and people in prominent places are heading it so that they can eliminate religious values out of the lives of our children. And ultimately, just like the communists said, give me 2 generations of your children without God in the schools, we'll have them. This nation has about been taken. Did you know that on May 10th, 1776, the Atlantic Council, a one-world government organization, approved a formal policy statement which states that a changing world, quote, can no longer be accommodated by political forms and sovereignties developed in the 18th and 19th centuries. In other words, the Constitution was developed in 1776 and it's obsolete. We can't have it anymore as a part of a government in this world, the New World Order. Do you know who was a member of the Atlantic Council? George Herbert Walker Bush. From Texas. He was also the CIA director during this period of time when he became a member of the Atlantic Council, a director on its board of directors in 1978, 1979. Did you know that in 1977, newly elected President Jimmy Carter appointed New World Order advocates to nearly every position in the federal government of the United States? He captured the Christian vote with his beautiful smile and saying that he was a Christian. He did not divulge, however, that he was entangled in the New World Order, a member of the Trilateral Commission, a founding member that is working for world government. Harlan Cleveland of the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies in 1977 published a book called The Third Try at World Order. He called for, and I quote, changing Americans' attitudes and institutions for complete disarmament, except for international authorities that would control the peace. He called for fairer distribution of worldly goods through the new international economic order. That is pure Marxism, socialism. But Americans haven't done their homework. They haven't studied the pronouncements of their enemies, so how would they know that they have an enemy among us? And that our own government officials in very high places, appointed by presidents and vice presidents, are working for world government. Did you know that in 1977, for the first time, the Council on Foreign Relations came under scrutiny? There was a book put out called Imperial Brain Trust by a man by the name of Shoup and Mentor. It criticized the Council on Foreign Relations for the first time. There were chapter headings inside the pages of that book, Imperial Brain Trust, such as Shaping a New World Order, and it exposed those who were working for it. It exposed the Council on Foreign Relations blueprint for world government, world control. And it went all the way back to 1939 to 1944 and told who were the players and how they did it. And then there was another chapter toward the 1980s, the Council's plan for a New World Order. And it brought forward undeniable proof that the Council on Foreign Relations was founded by Marxists. The number one main man was Colonel Edward Mandell House, the personal advisor to former President Woodrow Wilson in World War I. and that they were working to destroy our nation and rebuild it as a socialist communist country from the ground up. Bible prophecy happening before our eyes, but America sleeps. Christians are not looking for the return of Jesus Christ except in words only, but not by their lives, because they don't believe that it could happen in their lifetime. Did you know that in the January-February 1977 issue of the Humanist Magazine appeared an article by Sidney Hook, who was a signer of the Humanist Manifesto in 1973. Here's what he stated in that article, quote, "Human beings can be influenced to examine critically their religious beliefs only by indirection. I mean the development of a critical attitude in all our educational institutions that will aim to make them less religious in thought," end of quote. Now do we understand when we send our young people off to state colleges on fire for Jesus Christ and they come back atheist or indifferent? Because of the higher criticism in the classes that put down Christianity, bring into question the authority of the Bible when you can prove God exists. You can prove that the Bible was inspired over thousands of years. These are provable things. But since people don't take the time to prove them, they don't have a faith with a foundation upon which to stand. And the slightest wind of doctrine that blows around that criticizes their belief, they fall off the foundation. There is no steadiness in Christianity anymore, but there better be in us. Did you know that in 1979, Barry Goldwater, who was a retiring senator from Arizona, published his autobiography entitled "With No Apologies"? In this book, he reveals the true mission of the powerful Trilateral Commission and its older predecessor, the Council on Foreign Relations. He said their goal was to dissolve the sovereignty of the United States, to merge it into an all-encompassing one-world government with Russia. He said that there had to be a seen enemy, Russia versus Christianity, atheism, Christianity, socialism versus capitalism, and that they would be threats to one another throughout the Cold War. And if that were abated, that threat, there would be no need for a world government. So they had to continue to promote communism as the enemy of America, with a threat of nuclear annihilation to force us into a one-world government. Did you know that in 1979, a man by the name of Jerry Rifkin, along with Ted Howard, published a book entitled "The Emerging Order"? They made the claim that the only way to keep America from becoming a fascist society with Christian doctrine made by the right-wingers was to create a new covenant vision. In 1992, Bill Clinton and Al Gore, the ticket for president and vice president, brought and introduced openly the new covenant vision into the Democratic presidential campaign for the first time. It became their theme. Is there a conspiracy for world government? And there are human beings that are tools in the hands of the unseen spirit world, whether they know it or not. It does not matter. There is still the conspiracy to destroy Christianity and everything that is God and Jesus Christ out of the minds of the people in the world. Did you know that in 1980, a man by the name of Derek Scherer, who was a long-time member of the Institute for Policy Studies, which was a communist front organization, and that was all found and documented by a Dr. Stephen Powell in his book, Covert Cadre, inside the Institute for Policy Studies. He published a book, that is Derek Scherer, a book called Economic Democracy, in which he said that in the 1990s, a far leftist, which means communist president, would be elected in the United States. Scherer just happened to be Bill Clinton's roommate at Oxford University in England in 1969, when they were both there as Rhodes Scholars. The Rhodes Scholarship Fund has been declared by the Senate Subcommittee on Un-American Activities as a communist front and is a danger and a threat to the sovereignty of America. But Bill Clinton was elected, and we know the history of him, those who have paid attention. But according to a 1988 article in Policy Review, Derek Scherer and the Institute for Policy Study are, and I quote, committed to socialism in America and sides with the Soviet Union on almost every important foreign policy issue, end of quote. Once again, very powerful people. Derek Scherer was appointed ambassador to Denmark and other places in the Bill Clinton administration. Did you know that Bertram Gross published a book called Friendly Fascism, The New Face of Power in America? It was published in 1980. One section was entitled, quote, A Good Neighbor in a New World Order, end of quote. Another section title was Womb to Womb Dossier. He showed how that the federal government in Washington, D.C. now had such sophisticated electronic surveillance equipment that they could take everything about you, your Social Security, your driver's license, your IRS contributions, your medical dossier, everything about you, and composite it into one file, and its own file in Washington, D.C., and every American is now accounted for. Big Brother is now watching you. There is no such thing as freedom from the government anymore. Did you know that the director of the American Humanist Association from 1975 to 1980, a man by the name of Morris Storer, had published a book called Humanist Ethics? He claims, and I quote, a large majority of the educators of American colleges and universities are predominantly humanist, meaning they believe in man, not God. And a majority of the teachers who go out from their studies in colleges to responsibilities in primary and secondary schools are basically humanist. No matter that many maintain a nominal attachment to church or synagogue for good personal, social, and practical reasons, end of quote. So they're taking God and Jesus out of the lives and the minds of our teachers and sending them into the public schools. Not all of them, but the ones that they can trick and deceive. Did you know that in 1981, newly elected President Ronald Reagan, after the State of the Union message, during the question and answer session with reporters, said that the Federal Reserve System, that puts out the dollar bills, the fives, the tens, the twos, they don't put out the three with Clinton's phony face on it, but I've had one before sent to me. But all the Federal Reserve notes, he said that it was an autonomous or independent organization, not a part of the government of the United States. Most Americans think that because we get our dollar and it says Federal Reserve, that it's a federal government institution, and it is not. You can't even find it in the federal office section, federal government section of the Dallas Blue Pages. It's listed in the white pages under regular banks. But there's 8 international banking systems that own the Federal Reserve for their own profit. 4 are found in the United States and 4 foreign banks. And they use the money because they are all a part of the Illuminati working for world government. They use the excess profits to finance international socialism and communism around the world and their one world government. And he went on to say in that conference, and the answers to a woman from the Washington Post who's now dead, he said that these people at the Federal Reserve set their own interest rates according to their own purposes, not the purpose of the government of the United States. Why is it that every time the head of the Federal Reserve steps out the door, everybody bows down? They stand in awe, holding their breath to see whether they're going to raise interest rates or lower them. Because that means the federal government will go into more debt. Every dollar that goes into circulation is borrowed from the Federal Reserve. Now, if you go by the Constitution of the United States, it says that only Congress can coin money and set the value, and it must be backed with gold and silver, and it even gives the amount of gold and silver that must be in each coin. There is no way whatsoever, if we were living under the Constitution, that a private banking system controls our money. How can you be in debt unless you borrow it? What is the number one thing that the federal government has to do with the tax money that you and I put into it? Pay down the national debt, because we borrowed from bankers. Where if we coined the money ourselves, there would be no debt. There would be no interest because we created the money ourselves. But Americans don't understand that there is deception in the world today. They use the term federal to fool us, to make us think that it's a federal government operation. And then they try to say it's a reserve when there are no reserves. It's nothing but numbers on a computer printout. There is no gold and silver backing it. That's all gone. Fort Knox is empty. Has been since 1968. Did you know that in 1982, the future Vice President of the United States, Mr. Al Gore, was the chairman of the Congressional Clearinghouse on the future? He arranged for many members of Congress to attend and practice sessions of the Fourth General Assembly of the Fourth World Future Society. This World Future Society was a one-world government organization. Gore welcomed all those who wanted to participate, and he took them there and paid their way. Such speakers were Barbara Marx Hubbard, who is a New World Order and a New Age networker. Barbara Marx Hubbard had written several booklets advocating the necessary to destroy their adversaries that hold back the New World Order, those that oppose their way. She even referred to those in her organization as being the fulfillment of Revelation 6, verse 8. She said, quote, "We, the New Agers, are the riders of the pale horse, death." End of quote. This is why communism kills 1/3 of the population wherever they overthrow a country. Those that are not deemed suitable to go into the New World Order. And she has publicly stated that when they come into the New Age, a minimum of 25 to 90% of all Americans must die. Minimum. So they can start all over in a new world. Did you know that in 1983, the Humanists published an essay which won 3rd place in the North American Essay Contest? A man by the name of John Dunphy won the essay. He proclaimed, and I quote, "The battle for mankind's future must be waged in the public school classroom. Between the rotting corpse of Christianity and the new faith of humanism, and humanism will emerge triumphant," end of quote. What do these people think of Christianity? That it is a rotting corpse of a religion. It will be done away. It will be exterminated. Satan is the rulers of these people. Revelation 13:2. It's in the Bible. Nobody's taken it out. It says Satan, the devil, is giving rise to this end-time social system that'll fight Jesus Christ when he returns. In 1983, lawyer Constance Cumby wrote a book entitled The Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow. She exposed in depth the New Age movement and its goal for a new world order beginning with the age of Aquarius. The age of Aquarius, according to the stars, is the time when there's going to be a golden age of peace and prosperity for the world. The New Agers, under Satan's influence, want us to believe that they will rule it. But I've read the end of the book. They're the losers. Jesus Christ will rule and bring the world 1,000 years of peace and happiness and joy and offer salvation to mankind. Did you know that in 1984, the highest ranking KGB agent from the Soviet Union to ever defect to the West was a man by the name of Anatoly Golitsyn? He defected in the 70s, but he wrote a book in 1984. He published this book, and it's called New Lies for Old. He told in the introduction of this particular book how that there would be a false liberalization. In other words, the Soviet Union would look like they were becoming westernized, but it would all be a fake and a fraud to cause us to disarm. And we've quoted many times what Dmitry Manuelitsky said in the 1930s as a part of their program, their political warfare program, that they would start at a certain time pretending to be free states and to collapse. They would feign weakness, and then they would have the most fantastic peace offers the world had ever known. And when the Western world of Christianity disarmed and could not defend themselves, then Russia would strike. And they would obliterate America. But he went on to show that the KGB had not reformed. It was all a front. It was a pretense. And we see that today because Putin is now restarting the manufacture of all of his nuclear weapons, only with the most modern technology, and only destroying the old technology and the older nuclear weapons, which run down and become ineffective after a number of years. Did you know that in 1985, a man by the name of Norman Cousins, who was the honorary chairman of an organization called Planetary Citizenship, said that world government was inevitable. He was quoted in the Washington Weekly newspaper, Human Events, as saying, quote, "No arguments for or against it can change that fact." That was the fact that world government is inevitable. Once again, proving that Revelation 13 of your Bible is absolute. It's truthful, and Jesus Christ is the one that inspired it to be written. Revelation 1:1 told that Jesus gave it to John to reveal unto his servants the things which must come to pass. And so his true servants are understanding these things. And their eyes are being opened. The scales of blindness are dropping off. And they're seeing that world government is just over the horizon and it's nearly upon us. And that it's time for us to get our lives right with Jesus Christ. There is no time for delay. Those 10 virgins, 5 of them were foolish. They delayed their preparation. The door was shut in their face. And Jesus said, "I never knew you." That shouldn't happen to a one of us. Did you know that in 1985, after meeting with David Rockefeller of the Marxist Council on Foreign Relations and also founder of the Trilateral Commission, the first item on the agenda of Ronald Reagan after his second term began was to call upon the Senate of the United States to ratify the Genocide Convention Treaty with the United Nations. It was written in 1947 and had been rejected by the Senate all of those years because it was a threat to the sovereignty of the United States and to personal liberty. But now he called upon the Senate to pass it. This document is very diabolical in that it's designed to be used against individuals, specifically Christians, not nations. Otherwise, Russia would have been subject to it long ago. In Article 2, Section B, it says those who are guilty of genocide are those who cause mental harm. Why do you think we have hate crime laws now, straight out of the Genocide Convention Treaty to the United Nations? Hate crime says if you talk about certain biblical scriptures saying homosexuality is a sin, then you're promoting hate. This is how they're going to shut down Christianity in America. The Genocide Convention Treaty, I've been saying it since 1985. It didn't become apparent until they started having cases in the courts of America, Canada, Britain, and Sweden, and Australia, convicting people. Also within the Genocide Convention Treaty, Article 3, Section E, says that individuals who can be punished are those also who are in complicity. How do you think they're going to scatter churches from one end of the country to the other? If a minister stands up and says Jesus Christ is the only authority in their life, and they point out sin is sin, and they use the hate crime against the minister, then if you're in agreement with the minister, you're guilty too. Am I trying to chase everybody off? No, this is reality. This is prophesied in the pages of your Bible. This is Bible prophecy. And it will happen. It's inevitable that it's going to happen. And Jesus said you and I were to count the cost before we became a Christian. We were going to have to face tough times as a true saint of God in Satan's world. Those are not pleasant words to the ears of the New Agers, but they're fact, and they're truthful, and they're honest. Did you know that in 1986, an international meeting was held in Seoul, South Korea, which promoted the New World Order? Finance ministers from around the world heard the New World Order praised by those who held the meeting. and received a plea for a new world order to replace the International Monetary Fund and assume the debt of the third world countries so that we could all start off equal in the new world order. Did you know that in 1987, a publication, the fall issue of Free Inquiry, it was published by the Council for Democratic and Secular Humanism, a socialist organization, featured an article by Kathy Collins, who was a legal consultant to the Iowa Department of Education. This is very high up in education in that state. She criticized, quote, the Christian fundamentalists who want the freedom to indoctrinate their children with religious education, and that law would allow Christians to teach their children without oversight or interference from the state. She doesn't want any homeschooling. She didn't want anybody to be able to teach Christian principles to their children. These are high up educators in America. Americans' children are the target because the older generation, they'll exterminate them when they come into their power, and it will leave the younger people, and they must be without God and Jesus in their conscious mind. Did you know that in 1987, George Ball, the Undersecretary of State and Council on Foreign Relations member, said that the New World Order was to replace the Cold War? That's exactly what the Illuminati said. They will pit atheism against Christianity, socialism against capitalism, and the threat of the Cold War was extinction of the human race. Therefore, the only solution is to have a world government. And so he said, when the Cold War passes, it will be replaced by a new world order. And on December 7th, 1987, in an address to the United Nations organization, Mikhail Gorbachev, former head of the Soviet Empire, called for moving, quote, forward to a new world order, end of quote. Why is it that every one of the world leaders know the term New World Order, but the masses of people do not? Because they have a plan, they have a plot. They have one leader who is invisible, and they worship at the very highest level, Lucifer or Satan, and he gives them the power. Did you know that in 1987, the New York Times picked up an article from the Milan, Italy, prestigious weekly newspaper El Sabato concerning a 1987 visit of Bill Clinton, who was yet to become president. He went to the communist sector of that country. Why? He was there learning from Marxist Antonio Gramsci's works as to how to implement a Marxist economy in America. That's what the newspaper said. Who was it that wrote the book in 1980, Economic Democracy, and said a far leftist president would come into the White House in the 1990s, and it just happened to be his roommate? Why did Bill Clinton go to the communist sector? He had to prepare himself for when he went into the White House, and he knew he was going into the White House. Because a few years earlier, President or Vice President at that time, George Herbert Walker Bush, said, if they get tired of the Republican Party, then Bill Clinton, you're sitting in the wings. You will be the next president after they reject the Republicans. Who replaced 12 years of Republican rule? Bill Clinton, who went into the communist sector to learn how to implement a Marxist economy in the United States of America. Should there be any surprise in this? Did you know that the Demolay International Hall of Fame inducted Bill Clinton. He was a member of the DeMolay in high school. DeMolay is a Masonic Freemasonry youth organization that provides leadership training. According to a Masonic publication, quote, more than 3 million young men have knelt at the altars of DeMolay around the world since its founding in 1919, end of quote. The organization was named after Jacques DeMolay, who was the Grand Master of the Knights Templar. The Templars was a very powerful military and religious organization started about 900 years ago. And it's been accused of plotting to control the Western world. And Bill Clinton was a part of it. Did you know that in 1989, President George Herbert Walker Bush, who was a member of the ultra-secret Skull and Bones Society, he was inducted into it in 1948. His son, current president, in 1968. He was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a member of the Trilateral Commission, and a member of the Atlantic Council. Invited the Soviet Union to join the New World Order in his speech to the graduating class at Texas A&M on May 12th of 1989. Did you know that in 1990, Mikhail Gorbachev, in addressing a Stanford University audience, talked of a new world order? Quote, the Soviet Union and the United States have more than enough reasons to be partners in building a truly global economy. Indeed, the creation of a new civilization, end of quote. In a September 11th, 1990 address to Congress, President George Herbert Walker Bush called the Gulf War, quote, an opportunity for a new world order and a new age. Then on September 25th of 1990, the Soviet linked the Gulf-created crisis, the war that George Bush created, to the New World Order. So the Soviets even connected it to the New World Order and said that it was an act of terrorism perpetrated against the emergence of New World Order. They know the phrase. They know the terms. They know there's coming a New World Order. Those at the very head of it worship Lucifer. They're called Luciferians. They don't believe that he's Satan. They believe that he is the brother of Jesus Christ, but Jesus Christ hates mankind. That's what they teach. And Lucifer loves mankind and wants us to liberate us out of the grips of Jesus Christ and bring us every conceivable joy that we could ever think of. No wonder he gives his lavish gifts upon them and lets them travel the oceans in their yachts, their private jets. They're billionaires because they worship him. Did you know that excerpts from the Council on Foreign Relations member Paul Nitsky's speech on March 12th of 1990, at the very opening of the CFR's new office in Washington, D.C., was carried by the Wall Street Journal? I quote, he said the Council on Foreign Relations at one time had its headquarters in New York, where the capital of finance rested and political power also rested. But now they moved an office and created one in Washington, D.C. And he said in this article that the policy of the United States government was made by serious people, men with a longer view. These are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he said the great men of finance and their advisors. International bankers were the ones who are making the decisions to run this country for themselves. And they are the very top members of the Illuminati who worship him by name, Lord Rothschild of England, and so on. Did you know that the Council on Foreign Relations member George Sherry put out the book, The United Nations Reborn? This was in 1990. He stated, and this is falsely, however, that after all, the United Nations Charter is the law of the land. End of quote. In the September issue of UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, Courier, appeared an interview with a Mr. Harlem Brundtland. This is a foreign individual. It's not a Mr. either, it's a Miss. She was the former Prime Minister of Norway. She went on to say that we no longer should have nation states, a sovereign nation like the United States. She said some traditional national authority must be surrendered. We need a common authority to decide international moves. End of quote. Is there a conspiracy for world government? You as an individual can find all this information, but you just have to dig, and redig. You have to look, you have to learn the organizations, read their pronouncements. Thousands of hours are necessary of research. It's all there. You can prove that Satan's system is rising and it's just over the horizon. As we close the end of an age and head toward the age of Aquarius, they said they wanted to have their kingdom set up shortly before the age of Aquarius began. They're working very hard at such a thing. It hasn't happened yet, but it will happen. The Bible says it will. And this world will survive because there are people who are called the saints of God. And Jesus Christ will return to this earth for one reason: to salvage mankind because of the faithfulness of a few in comparison to the many. That means that those who have had the scales of blindness fall off their eyes and they understand the Bible, that the authority is Jesus Christ. He's the one that wrote it, and the Father gave him permission. He said he did nothing except he saw it of the Father. And so the Father has given him everything to say to you and to me, and to give us the words of life. And he's given us prophetic words, 1/3 of the Bible. They should have meaning to us because Jesus, our Savior, is the one who gave the outline. We just fill in the blanks. He told us to watch. In all 3 chapters, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he said watch, but it didn't mean just watch world news. It also meant watch our personal spiritual lives to make sure that when we see all these events converging together at one time, he said that generation would not pass till everything's done. That means his return. Are you living in the time when Jesus Christ will return? You can bank your hat on it. You will if you're young enough. Jesus Christ said it will happen when every one of these prophetic utterances written down converge at the same time, and they're all here. It's just a matter of waiting it out. But while we're waiting it out, we have to watch to make sure that our lives are right with Jesus Christ. And that means there is an everlasting covenant that we have to live by. God gave that covenant to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, even though it didn't use that term. He said the soul that sins in Ezekiel 18, verse 4 and 20, that sins will die. Well, what is sin? It's violation of the everlasting covenant. Adam and Eve was told, if you eat of this tree, and it wasn't an apple either. It was symbolic of the law of God, the covenant of God. If you violate it, then you're going to die. They did. Jesus Christ then appeared to Abraham, and he said he would make an everlasting covenant in Genesis 17, 1-7, with him and his children after him for an everlasting covenant. Then he brought Israel at the base of Mount Sinai, and he proposed a covenant with them. It was the same everlasting covenant because Isaac was told the very reason why God made the promises to Abraham was that he kept his laws, his statutes, his judgments. And that's what the everlasting covenant is. And Jesus came not to formulate a new religion, not to do away with the Old Testament, but Jesus came along to verify the promises made to the fathers. That's found in Romans. And it's also found in Hebrews 13, 20 and 21 that he died to shed the blood for us violating the everlasting covenant. So, brethren, today I implore you by the authority of Jesus Christ, who purchased us, who has redeemed us by his shed blood, that when we watch world news, we rejoice, not have fear. We rejoice because we know that every day that we march closer to this anti-Christ system, we are to look up because our salvation is coming closer. That's what should make us rejoice. The time when we will have that new body. The time when we will help Jesus Christ to overthrow this system. Revelation 17, 12-14 says so. We will be kings and priests, according to Revelation 5, verse 9 and 10, and we will reign on this earth. How much more confidence could we have in our Savior Jesus Christ? Because he has placed confidence in us that we will be overcomers, that we will remain faithful unto the end, and then we will receive the reward, a new body, so that we can have the power to control the world and enforce his law upon the inhabitants thereof. Thank God that you and I have had the scales fall off of our eyes. And thank God that some of you have listened intently today. When I look out across the length and breadth of America, my heart becomes very saddened, very stirred with emotion because of what I see. The nation is dripping with innocent blood of unborn children because of abortion. I hurt to see incest, child abuse, wife abuse, desertion of families, adultery, fornication, homosexuality.
America, great land that we love. America, you must turn to God.
I see lying, stealing, covenant breaking, broken homes, and the absence of God in the churches, homes, schools, and in the nation. America, your judgment is not long off. You were declared a Christian nation in a 9-0 decision of the Supreme Court on February 29, 1892. However, just because a physical government declares a nation Christian does not mean they live it with a heart. You've mostly turned your back upon your only source of blessings, Jesus Christ.
In these United States and the world, God has spoken by His word, and His servants, we must all heed the warnings of His watchmen and His prophets as they turn us to the Lord. America, great land. There's a man who speaks the truth with a voice that's oh so clear. A watchman for the Lord is he. He speaks of God and prophecy. Newswatch Magazine. Listen to this man. Newswatch Magazine. Exposing Satan's plans. Newswatch Magazine. He loves America. Newswatch Magazine. Not afraid to tell it all. Newswatch Magazine.
Newswatch Magazine presents the analysis of world news in the light of Bible prophecy with David J. Smith.
Did you know that the book of Revelation, chapter 13, the entirety of the chapter, tells about the end-time social system that is rising, and that this social system will literally create the mark of the beast? And there will be individuals all over the world that will be forced to take it while others will resist, and as a direct result, they will have tribulation brought upon them. Revelation 13 tells of this, and it will end with the coming of Jesus Christ to smash this system. Did you know also in Revelation chapter 13, verse 2, that it says that Satan, this great red dragon, will give rise to this end-time system? On May 1st, 1776, Adam Weishaupt created the Illuminati, an ultra-secret organization. As time went by, he died, and a man by the name of Giuseppe Mazzini took over the revolutionary part of the Illuminati, and Albert Pike, the spiritual part of the Illuminati, so that they could work for a world government. They hoped that it would be enforced by early into the 21st century by the age of Aquarius. Did you know that on August 15th, 1871, to give the final blueprint for the 20th and 21st century, this was to be their plan of world conquest. There was a letter that was written by them to each other that was on display in the British Museum Library in London, England until 1977, and it secretly disappeared. It was mysteriously removed by someone who was a part of the Illuminati. In graphic details, though, it outlined many revolutionary wars and 3 world wars. We've seen, starting with the overthrow of the Russian government, 1917 to 1919, we've seen revolutionary wars that have been going all over the world. They're called wars of liberation. And then we're still seeing them to this very moment in the century of 2000. And so 2001. So we are definitely headed toward the end times. Out of this particular letter, Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini wrote to each other and said not only would they have all of these revolutionary wars, but they would have at least 3 world wars. We saw World War I, we all know that, World War II, but the third one was to be different. It was to pit Russian atheism against Christianity or capitalism. This was to be brought about so that they could destroy both Christianity and atheism at the same time. And therefore, the worship of Lucifer would come on the scene. Did you know that in 1829, there was an American luminist who held a series of lectures in New York? She brought together all of the nihilist revolutionaries. Her name was Frances Wright. She advocated the entire Adam Weishaupt program for world government. She said that they would use the word communism and it would make it more palatable for the human race to swallow and accept. A part of the program was equal opportunity and equal rights, and we've seen that since the 1960s and 70s, right on into the 21st century in the United States of America. Then they also advocated atheism. We've seen that sweeping the globe, the emancipation of women and free love. This has all been a part of their program to destroy the Christian morals in the country. So this organization that was to become their destructive force was called communism. It was to foment wars and revolutions all over the world. Did you know that Colonel Edward Mandell House published a book? He happened to be the top advisor to President Woodrow Wilson of the United States. He published a book called Philip Drew Administrator. He called for socialism in America that was dreamed of by Karl Marx. He also guided passage into law the Federal Reserve Act and the graduated income tax, both of which are two of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. Did you know that in 1919, when the United States, after their defeat in World War I of the German and the Axis powers, the occupation there, they discovered the communist rules for revolution. They stated that they wanted to corrupt the young people in the Western world. They wanted to get them away from religion so that the country would crumble. History told them, and they are students of history, that any country that turns their back upon the true and the living God, it will crumble and go into chaos. They said that they wanted to get their minds onto sex. They wanted to make them superficial. Did you know that one of the programs also that they wanted to activate in the United States of America, Great Britain, and the Western world, and Europe, was that they would get people's mind off their government by focusing them on athletics, on sexy books, and then trivialities such as movie theaters, plays, and things of that nature. Keep their minds occupied so that they could infiltrate governments. Then they could bring about the destruction of every country in which they had infiltrated. They wanted to create hostile groups, one against the other, harping on controversial matters of no importance whatsoever, not when you logically thought them through. And that way you would dissect the population, create problems between races, between religions, and so on. They wanted to also destroy the people's natural faith in their leaders by holding them up to ridicule, by also showing all of their sins and disgrace them in the eyes of the public. They wanted to always preach what they termed democracy. But when they would seize power, they would be as ruthless as possible in gaining control of the country and the lives of the people. They wanted to encourage governments to become very extravagant in their spending. This way, they would create debt crisis and cause the whole country to collapse economically. And when you're in economic upheaval, you're an easy target for Marxist communists. And remember, communism was created by the Illuminati, worshipers of Lucifer. They wanted also, as their third part of this particular program, to cause the registration of all firearms on some pretext, with a long-term range of confiscating every single gun and leaving the population helpless. This is a part of those communist rules of revolution that they found in 1919 in Dusseldorf, Germany. Did you know that the Fabian Society, a man by the name of George Bernard Shaw, in a very bad year for the rest of the world, wrote a book. It was called The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism and Capitalism. He wrote it in 1928. He revealed that under socialism, you would not be allowed to be poor. They would force you to be fed. They would force you to be clothed, lodged, no matter how the poverty would be, at least they would force it. They would then force you to be employed, whether you liked it or not. And if you were discovered that you did not have the character and the industry to go out and work, then you could possibly be executed as a useless eater in society. Did you know that it was during the 1920s that V.I. Lenin made his famous predictions concerning world domination? He stated, first, we will take Eastern Europe. Then we will take the masses of Asia. Then we will encircle the United States, which will be the last bastion of socialism or capitalism, and then they would not have to attack, but they felt their infiltration would be so thorough that the United States would fall into their hands like a ripe fruit. They did take Eastern Europe when Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt all signed the treaty that ended World War II. The Russians were allowed to take 100 million people behind the Iron Curtain. And then, later on in the 1950s, China fell, and behind the bamboo curtain was the largest populated nation on the face of the earth. Then the United States began to withdraw from Vietnam. And then the domino theory came about. They began to take all of Asia. Second stage complete. And then they said they would surround the United States. Cuba fell. Fidel Castro overthrew it. The most prosperous Latin American country in the Western Hemisphere, Cuba fell. Then Nicaragua, San Salvador, and today we have every country in South and Central America, with the exception of one or two, are now socialist. Mexico has been socialist for many years. Communists march down the streets openly, and they advocate the overthrow of the United States. Did you know that Dmitry Manulusky, who was a professor at the Lenin School of Political Warfare in Moscow, that in the 1930s he announced a plan through which America would be taken in the latter stages of their conquest for world government. If their infiltration and falling into the hands of socialism like a ripe fruit did not work, he said that war to the hilt between communism and capitalism was inevitable. He said then in the 1930s they weren't strong enough to attack. He said our time will come in the future. In order to win, we have to put the West to sleep. So he said we would begin to launch the most spectacular peace movement on record. There would be electrifying overtures, unheard of concessions. He said that the capitalist countries like America and Great Britain would be stupid and decadent. He said that they would rejoice to cooperate to their own destruction. Then he went on and concluded, they will leap at another chance to be friends. Why? Because of the open trade policy. And then he said, as soon as their military guard is down, we will smash them with our clenched fist. Have we seen electrifying overtures that were begun in 1985 when Gorbachev stepped down? Did we see the Berlin Wall come tumbling down? Did we see East and West Germany put back together as one nation? Did we see Mikhail Gorbachev allow the satellite countries to become free democracies, pretending that they would be? They weren't really. They were controlled by the KGB. When one satellite country decided to leave because they said they were free, the Russians went after them with a vengeance. Did you know that just like the more modern-day Richard Nixon, that the United States had been planned to be broken down into 9 regions? Richard Nixon said 10 and broke it down into 10 regions. But in the 1930s, to be exact, 1935, a Mr. Delbert Clark of the New York Times wrote the members of Congress, and especially Senator Robert Wagner of New York, and asked them about their reorganization of America into 9 groups. They wanted to break the 48 continental states down into 9 groups. Richard Nixon did it in 1972. Why would they do such a thing as that? A woman by the name of Mary Munt, who was the wife of former South Dakota Senator Munt, wrote a letter in the 1960s in which was published in Arizona in the National Federation of Republican Women's Clubs Literature. She said that they wanted to break the United States down into 9 groups. She said she remembered back when she and her husband had visited the Hoover Dam, and how the man who was showing the guests there that were looking at the dam, how that if they mashed one button, they could turn off the lights and electricity in San Bernardino, California. How they could mash another button and there would be no water in Los Angeles. Then she said, my mind went back to a dimly lit room way back in the 1934 in Denver, Colorado. Her husband and she had infiltrated a communist party at the University of Colorado, and the professor who was the communist was presenting their plan for seizing control of the government of the United States. Several times during this particular meeting, the phrase came up that an invasion of the United States may not be necessary to overthrow it. If they played their cards right, it could be taken from within. And then he pulled out a map and showed how they had broken down the United States with no borders. But it was 9 TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, electrical plants and dams, just like the Hoover Dam. And the professor said that we can never take the United States if they have 48 strong state governments. But if we get the states to depend upon more and more the centralized federal government in Washington, D.C. for their very existence, all we have to do is take Washington. Then the United States could be plunged into darkness and disaster with our fingers on the buttons. This was all planned back in the 1930s. Did you know that on July 9th, 1947, that President Richard Nixon, he was only the representative at that time, but later to become president, introduced House Concurrent Resolution number 68. He asked that the Congress of the United States and the President should immediately take the initiative in calling a general conference of the United Nations and make the United Nations a world power and enforce world law. This was our president in 1968 until he resigned. Did you know that many resolutions were introduced into Congress after World War II calling for world government? Albert Einstein, a man that most people have heard of in America, who was a member of the World Federalist Organization, he made a radio broadcast on July 17, 1947, that was entitled The Immediate Need for World Law. In that particular broadcast, he said, and I quote, that the resolutions aim at a fundamental alteration of the United Nations Charter with a view to an eventual transformation of the United Nations into a world government. End of quote. So is there a Luciferian drive for world government that has been going for a long time? Yes, there is. Did you know that Philip Jessup, who was a member of the Marxist Council on Foreign Relations and also a World Court Justice and a communist, wrote a book entitled The International Problem of Governing Mankind? Here's what he stated, quote, I agree that national sovereignty is the root of evil. The question of procedure remains. Can the root be pulled up by digging around it and cutting it rootless one by one? End of quote. Jessup was a member of the Institute of Pacific Relations, which was cited as following. Quote, the Institute of Pacific Relations was a vehicle used by the communists to orientate American Far Eastern policy toward communist objectives. End of quote. And that was found in the Senate Report 2050, 82nd Congress, 2nd Session, page 225. Did you know that in 1948, Sir Julian Huxley, the very first Director General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, published the following piece of literature, UNESCO, the purpose, and its philosophy. In it, he stated without apology, and I quote, "The general philosophy of UNESCO should be a scientific world humanism. Anyone who understands humanism knows that that means you're without God. Man is elevated into the ranks of the gods. We as humans are gods." That's what they believe. He went on to say that global in extent and evolutionary in background. So evolution came into the play. He said in its educational program, it can stress the ultimate need for world political unity and familiarize all people with the implication of the transfer of full sovereignty from separate nations to a world organization. This is what we have been up against for all of these years in the Christian community. We have not understood behind the scenes what was happening in transforming our country into a globalist state. And we hear the word globalism all the time today. Did you know that UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, continued to publish literature to subvert the United States? In a series of booklets with a title Toward World Understanding, it states, quote, "The kindergarten has a significant part to play in a child's education. It can not only correct many of the errors of home training, it can prepare the child for membership in the world society. The success of the teacher is bringing up his pupils to be good citizens of the world. As long as the child breathes the poisoned air of nationalism, education in world-mindedness can produce little results." End of quote. So the drive for world government is on. It's been ongoing. Did you know that a socialist super work in propaganda was written by a man by the name of George Orwell? This super work was entitled 1984. This book became required reading in colleges all across America up until at least the year 1959. The book 1984 had the theme of Big Brother and such concepts as Newspeak or double speak. Did you know that on July 26, 1949, 18 United States senators sponsored resolution number 56 that called for the United Nations to be restructured as a world federation? These were senators in the United States that are to represent we the people. Did you know that in 1950, on April 24th, a California district court ruled that the United Nations Charter had become, quote, "the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. And anything in the Constitution or laws of any state in the contrary notwithstanding," end of quote. This decision was overturned by the California Supreme Court on April 17th, 1952, and only for one reason: because the United Nations Charter was not self-executing. Therefore, in legal terms, the United Nations could not go into existence as the supreme law of the land. But they're changing that. Did you know that in 1951, the phrase rock and roll was created by disc jockey Alan Freed? This softer rock became the instrument through which hard rock would later come on the scene and emerge. Jefferson Airplane's leading musician by the name of Paul Cantor admitted the following, I quote, "The new rock music is intended to broaden the generation gap. alienate parents from their children, and prepare young people for revolution. End of quote. Lead singer of another group called Mothers of Invention, Frank Zappa, said, and I quote, "The loud sounds and the bright lights of today are tremendous indoctrination tools." End of quote. Did you know that in 1952, a man by the name of Aldous Huxley had a book written? It was entitled The Devils of Loudon. Inside the covers, it said, and I quote, "If espoused long enough to the tom-toms and the singing, every one of our philosophers would end up by capering and howling with savages. Assemble a mob of men and women, treat them to amplified band music, bright lights, and in next to no time you can reduce them to a state of almost mindless subhumanity. Never before have so few been in a position to make fools, maniacs, or criminals out of so many." End of quote. Did you know that on April 12th, 1952, John Foster Dulles, who was a member of the Marxist Council on Foreign Relations and later became the Secretary of State, began to perpetuate a giant lie? As Hitler said, if you tell a lie big enough and long enough, everybody will believe it. Because the United States courts had rejected the United Nations Charter as the supreme law of the land, therefore he began to spread the following. He spoke before the American Bar Association in Louisville, Kentucky. This was 1952. I quote his statements. "Treaty law can override the Constitution when in reality it cannot. Treaties can take powers away from Congress and give them to the president. They can take powers from the Senate and the states and give them to the federal government or to some international body. And they can cut across the rights given to the people by their constitutional Bill of Rights." End of quote. Now do we understand why they have gotten away with so many things in destroying our Constitution and Bill of Rights? Because they say treaties override them, and the treaties with the United Nations eliminates our Constitution and Bill of Rights. Did you know that in the same year of 1952, the World Association of Parliamentarians for World Government drew up a map designed to illustrate how foreign troops would occupy and police every nation in the world, and the United States and Canada were divided into 6 regions? Their plan was that Russians would occupy Texas and south of the Mason-Dixon line, while Communist China would occupy the western part of the United States of America. That is still in the books of the United Nations organization. Did you know that July 30th, 1953, there was a report of the Jenner Committee that is probably the most comprehensive of all the congressional investigations undertaken by the Internal Senate or Security Subcommittee of the United States, the Senate Division. Here are the conclusions that they came to in that report. Number 1, remember, international communism was created by the Illuminati, the ultra-billionaires and the rich of the world that worship Lucifer. Here's what they concluded. The Soviet International Organization has carried on a successful and important penetration into the United States government, and this penetration has not been fully exposed. Number 2, this penetration has extended from the lower ranks to the top level policy and operating positions in our government. Top level. Number 3, The agents of this penetration have operated in accordance with distinct designs fashioned by their Soviet superiors. Number 4, members of this conspiracy, their word, not mine, helped to get each other into government, have helped each other to rise in government, and protected each other from exposure. Number 5, in general, the communists who infiltrated our government work behind the scenes, guiding research, preparing memoranda on which basic American policies are set, writing speeches for cabinet officers, influencing congressional investigations, drafting laws, manipulating administrative reorganization, always serving the interest of their Soviet superiors. And the 6th point they made, policies and programs laid down by the members of the Soviet conspiracy are still in effect within our government and continue to be a continuing hazard to our national security. Did you know that Senator Jenner, who led the Jenner Committee, proceeded to say, quote, "Today the path toward total dictatorship in the United States can be laid strictly by legal means. We have a well-organized political action group in this country determined to destroy our Constitution and establish a one-party state. It has a foothold within our government and its own propaganda apparatus. One may call this group by many names. Some call it socialism, some collectivism. I prefer to call it democratic centralism. The important point to remember is not the ideology of the organization, but its strict organizational abilities. It is a dynamic, aggressive, elite corps forcing its way through every opening in our government to make a breach for a collectivist one-party state in America. It operates secretly, silently, continuously to transform our government without our suspecting the change is underway." I'll continue his statement. This secret revolutionary corps understands well the power to influence the people by an elegant form of brainwashing. We see this, for example, in the innocent use of words like democracy in place of representative government or Republican government. It conducts tactical retreats. It'll back up if you catch them, but only the more surely to advance to its own goal. As V.I. Lenin said, if we're caught, we'll take one step backwards, then we'll take 2 steps forward, and we're gaining momentum. I'll continue the conclusion of his statement. I know of Alger Hisses, who planned it that way. Dr. Worth of my state told us in 1934 that the plans were all drawn. The timetable had already been established. Did you know that Renee Wormser, who was the General Counsel for the United States House of Representatives Special Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations, on April 5th, 1954, wrote to a Mr. Sproul Braden, who was the former Assistant Secretary of State and Ambassador concerning the Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, Rhodes Scholarship Trust, and on and on. On April 10th, 1954, Braden replied in writing, quote, I have the very definite feeling that these various foundations you mention were very definitely do exercise overt and covert influences on our foreign relations, and that their influences are counter to the fundamental principles on which this nation was founded that has made it so great. End of quote. There is a conspiracy for world government to take our freedoms from us, just like Revelation 13 said. Did you know that an ultra-private organization came into being in 1954 known as the Bilderbergers? It was formed by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. They first met at the Bilderberger Hotel. That's where they got their name, the Bilderbergers. Bernhard's wife, Queen Juliana of the Netherlands, later became one of the first to endorse planetary citizenship, a one-world government organization. Many of the top statesmen in American politics have attended their meetings. Just a few examples, starting way back there in 1954 and moving forward, were Dean Acheson, Kristen Herder inside of our government, Dean Rusk, Robert McNamara, George Ball, Henry Kissinger, former President Gerald Ford, former President George Bush, the older Bush, Dan Quayle, Vice President, former Vice President, Lloyd Bentsen, and former President Bill Clinton. Yes, the corporate giant CEOs attend these meetings, along with David Rockefeller, who happens to be at one time the head of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, head of the Board of Directors of the Chase Manhattan International Bank. Yes, their goal was to create a corporate world government. This would set the stage for the mark of the beast.
Well, hello again, brethren. Thank you for joining us. I hope everyone enjoyed the message today from David J. Smith titled Prophecy, Did You Know? This was part B. Now, this year's Fall Feast Days begins in less than 2 weeks. Those of you who want to write down the probable Fall Feast dates, grab a pen and paper. If the new moon of the 7th month is sighted on the 29th day after the last sighting of the new moon, then the Feast of Trumpets will begin at the sighting of the new moon at sunset on the evening of Friday, September 18th, and will continue through and until sunset the following evening of Saturday, September 19th. Now remember that the Feast of Trumpets is a high day, and we do no work on that day. The Day of Atonement, also a high day, will begin at sunset on the evening of Sunday, September 27th, and go through and until sunset Monday, September 28th. On the Day of Atonement, we do no work, we eat no food, and we drink no water. The next high day will be the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, and it will begin at sunset on Friday, October 2nd, and going through and until sunset on Saturday, October 3rd. The first day of the Feast of Tabernacles is a high day, so we do no work on that day. And then we finish up with the high day of the last great day, which begins at sunset on the evening of Friday, October 9th, and goes through and until sunset the following evening of Saturday, October 10th. Again, we do no work on that day. Now, even though October 4th through 9th are not high days, they are days from the Feast of Tabernacles, so if it is at all possible, we should take off all of the days during the feast. And that would be from sunset on the evening of Friday, October 2nd, through and until sunset on the evening of Saturday, October 10th. Now, for those of you watching the broadcast, you can see those dates on the screen behind me here. You can also navigate to the website as well, newswatchmagazine.org, where you can find the dates listed right there on top of the page. And if you haven't done so already, sign up for your free one-year subscription of the magazine. And I encourage you to do so if you haven't. There's an orange subscribe or login button located in the upper right corner of the homepage on newswatchmagazine.org. And brethren, at this point, I'd like to mention that Brenda Smith would like to extend her gratitude for everyone's continued support, as demonstrated through your tithes, offerings, donations, and prayers. And remember that your support is always a tremendous help in keeping us getting God's word out to all those who have an ear to hear. So if you found that these messages have been a blessing to you, we would like to ask in return if you could also be a blessing to us. Whatever the good Lord moves you to give and your finances will allow is always greatly appreciated and will always be used to continue to get God's word out to all those who have an ear to hear. You can send your tithes, donations, and offerings to Post Office Box 36, Waxahachie, Texas 75168. Again, that's Post Office Box 36, Waxahachie, Texas 75168. Brethren, don't forget to follow us on Facebook.com/The Newswatch Mag. And don't forget to sign up for your free one-year subscription to Newswatch Magazine. There was a slight delay with getting this month's magazine ready with the unforeseen issues with the website, trying to get messages ready for the fall feast days, and then writing and publishing a magazine. Well, it kind of exhausted my available time. But I'm hoping to get the magazine ready by this evening. If not, then I can, of course, have it ready by Monday. Sorry for the delay. And please spread the word and let others know about the magazine and our Facebook page. Until we meet again, do not accept the mark of the beast, and let's make all our days worthy of God's blessings. You all have a blessed week, and goodbye for now.